Hey, in this LibreOffice database tutorial video, I'll show you how to build a feature-rich database without using a single line of macro code. We'll have to use some SQL though, but I'll explain it thoroughly in the video. Specifically, I'm going to build this database application to manage courses for a fictional college teaching programming for business. You'll be able to add and delete courses, add and delete students, and assign students to courses. In addition to that, the database form that you'll create shows you at a glance how many courses each student is enrolled in and how many students each course has. It'll also allow you to navigate to each course and see exactly the names of all students in each course. You can get the SQL download that goes with this course at the link to the accompanying blog post that will appear at various parts of this video. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to like and subscribe. It helps me with the YouTube algorithm. The description also will hold a link to all of my LibreOffice base database videos, so check it out. You might find some other interesting stuff there also. Enjoy. Launching LibreOffice Base, select an embedded database for simplicity. So I'm going to call it Student Database No Code, and let's save it. And there we go. We're going to use SQL to add the tables to the database now. So first of all, I'm going to use the create table syntax. So create table, table course in quotes, because I don't want everything to be uppercase. The default for LibreOffice Base is if you don't put an object name such as the table or the field names in quotes, they will automatically default to uppercase. So ID, obviously, I didn't need to put in quotes because I want it in uppercase. So if I get this and I copy it and I go to the database and I do Tools, SQL, and paste in the SQL and choose Execute, command successfully executed. So if I do View, Refresh Tables, the first table appears, table course. Now, you'll notice that each of these SQL statements has a semicolon at the end of it. So that means that within this particular window, it delimits one SQL statement from another. So I can, with one command, just create the other two tables. So if I do Control-C on that and then go back to Tools, SQL, paste both commands in here and choose Execute, and then choose Close, then do View, Refresh Tables, all three tables have now been created. The SQL for this will be available on the accompanying blog post, which you can get at businessprogrammer.com/go/117. Now, we can populate the tables just by putting all of this SQL into the window because each statement is delimited by this semicolon. Insert into table student, that being the table name, first name, last name, then value, and then put in the values. Notice for text, you've got to put a single quote around the values. This particular name here, O'Connor, single quote is a special value within databases to signify text. Insert into the database, you've got to escape it by using another single text to notify the database that you're escaping it in that manner. Anyhow, I can populate all these tables in one fell stroke by just copying them and doing Tools, SQL, pasting the whole lot into this window, choosing Execute, Close, and now you'll notice that table course has some courses in it, table map course student has its mappings, and table student has the student names entered already. Now it's time to build our form, so I click on Forms, Create Form in Design View. Now to design our form, we need to ensure that the toolbars that you can see here are actually available within your form palette. So what we're going to do is do View, Toolbars, and you definitely need Form Controls, Form Design, and Standard available. We don't need Drawing right now, but I will pull it back a bit later, so I'm going to lose the Drawing menu for the time being. Now the first element that we need is the Form Navigator, so we pull that up. I like to create my first data source, which I call DS No Data, and the purpose of this is to group under it the controls that are not data related, such as labels or grouping boxes. So let's do that first. We're going to need to add and delete courses. So step one is we're going to have to create a course data source and then course table. So let's create our new data source now. New form, yes, I know it says form, but it's actually a data source. DS course table, and now we need to look at the properties of this, and so it's got its name course table, but we need to give it a table name, and so the DS course table data source will be attached to the course table. With the course table selected, we then select a table control, and we can draw that on the form like so, and we now need to give that some properties. So going over to the table control, we give that the name grid courses, and we're going to anchor it to the page, and the position X will be 1.15 centimeters, and the Y position 1.93, and the width will be 6.5 centimeters, and the height will be 5.5. So you will notice that grid courses is attached to the course table data source, but now we need to put in a field, and the field name that this grid is going to deal with will be the courses field. So in order to do that, what we've got to do is move our cursor over the top bar of the grid and right click and then choose insert column, and in this instance I'm going to choose a text box, and I'm going to now click on the text box and go to the properties of that text box like so, and put in some settings. So the text box is going to be called text courses, and I'm going to give it a label of courses. And I'm also going to set its width to 5.32 centimeters. Next, I need to set its data field property to the field name that I want. And in this instance, it's going to be course name. And now I can test it to see if it works. And there we go. We've got our courses. I can delete a course by just pressing the delete key when that particular row is highlighted. Or I can add a new course by just clicking in the new row there and typing my course name. So for example, in this instance, I could type in, and we've got a new course. Now we need to manage students. So let's create a data source for the students table. So we do right click, new, form, and I'm going to call this form DS student table. Like so, and then going to the properties window, I'm going to click on the data source, and the data source is going to be a table, and the table is going to be table student. Now, having created that, I now need to add a grid control. So with the student data source highlighted, I go down to the table area and I draw a table control like so. And now it's time to set the properties of this table control. So this table control I'm going to call grid students like so, and I'm going to set up its properties. So its X position is going to be 8.1 and its Y position is going to be 1.89 and its width is going to be 7.9 and its height 5.5. Now we need to add the first name and last name for our students. So again, hovering over the top bar of the control, I'm going to right click, insert column, and I'm going to insert a text box. If I click on the text box, I'm going to give it the name text box first name, and its label will be first name, and I'm going to give it a width of 3.44 centimeters. And I'm going to set its data property to be the data field first name. And it's got this information because it's attached to the student data source, and the student data source is attached to the table student, so it can pick the fields that are available on table student, and that's how this drop down first name last name is available. So again, I hover over the top bar, insert column, text box, and I'm going to click on the text box, and its data field in this instance is going to be last name, and I'm going to call this txt last name, and I'm just going to give it the label last name, and I'm going to have to set the width to 3.25. And let's just click on the design mode, switch design mode to run mode, just to see that it's working okay. And there we go. We have got our courses listed here, and we've got all our students listed here. So we can delete a student by hitting the delete key, and we can add a new student just by typing in the first name and last name there. So let's remember to save our work. So let's just save the form initially. So I'm just going to give it a name, and I'm going to call it form course student. There we go. Okay, so let's add the courses data source. So I click on forms, the top level, new form, and I'm going to call it DS courses overview. And then I go to the properties, and it's table, and it's going to link to table course. Now we need to create the next data source, which is going to be course students. So with DS course overview highlighted, click new, form again, and rename it to DS course student, and then I click on it to get the properties, and it's going to map to, it's going to be a table on the data tab. We're going to go to table, and it's going to be table map course student, and the link master field is going to be ID, and here it's going to be course ID. So just draw a grid roughly on the form, and now what we got to do is give it some properties. So if I click on the properties button and click on the grid, got to give it a name, and I'm going to give it the name grid map course students, and let's set up its sizings. Its X position will be 1.15 and its Y position will be 9.12 centimeters, and I'll give it a width of 10.92 and a height of 7.45. Okay, and what we want to do is anchor it to the page. Next, we're going to want to add a list box for students and a list box for courses. This being because we want to be able to use a drop down, and I'm going to give it the name list courses and the caption of courses, and let's just set its data, and so its data field will be course ID, and the type of list contents will be SQL, and what I'm going to do is just put in the following SQL. So it's going to be select course name ID from table course. And I'll just save that. Let's just run it to test it. So there we go. That's what we're getting. And I'm just going to save it. And now it's saved into the list content. So now I right click over the header again, insert column. Again, it's going to be a list box. And if I click on the list box, I'm going to give it the name list students, and the label will be students. and let's just give it a width of 4.23 centimeters, and courses will have a width of 6.01 centimeters, and they're set up. So now students, the data again is going to be student ID, but then it's going to have SQL as its data source into here by double clicking on that. Close to switch design mode off. Press Ctrl V to put in the SQL. So this SQL is select last name, and so within HSQLDB SQL you can concatenate with the two pipe symbols. So select last name, pipe, space, pipe, first name with the alias name. So last name space first name will be called name and then ID. So if I run that query, you'll see you got a space between the names. Then by just closing the SQL, it'll prompt me to save it. So I'll just say yes, do I want to save the changes? Student ID, last name, first name. So I can now test whether it's returning any data by switching design mode off temporarily. And here we go, LibreOffice Base Advanced. Now we need to add some buttons to move backwards and forwards on the course. This is relatively simple. We're going to highlight the DS Courses Overview data source. Then we're going to find a button control, and I'm going to draw two button controls on the form. Now the first button control, I'm going to select the button that I've just highlighted, push button 1, and I'm going to give this the name PB for push button and previous course, and I'm just going to call it previous course. The position X will be 1.15, the position Y will be 18.02, and I'm going to set a width of 5 centimeters and a height of 1 centimeter. Same goes for this particular push button here. This is going to be PB next course, and I'm going to give it the caption next course, and I'm going to anchor it to page. Clicking back on this one, we need to set its X, Y, width and height, and then we go down and set its action property. So we just click on action and it's going to be next record, and if we click on the previous course button, we get its action property, and its action is going to be previous record. And let's just test it by clicking on design mode. So next course, previous course. Yes, now it works. Now I'm going to add two more buttons because they're not strictly required, because if we go to next course and we want to move between the records, we can use the actual controls on the grid. But if you want a bit more fine control over it, or you've prefer to have buttons, we can do it via buttons as well. So in order to put these navigation buttons on, we must select the correct data source and its course student. Draw it anywhere, in this instance anywhere on the sheet, because what I'm doing is I'm going to put in the coordinates manually again. Put another push button in. I'm going to call it PB previous, and I'm going to call it previous, and then the action is going to be previous record, and let's set its coordinates. So position X is 1.15, position Y is 16.76, our width is 5 and height will be 1. And now we're going to set the properties on this push button here. So it's going to be PB next, and we're just going to call it next. And then we're going to set the anchor to page, and position X again will be 7.06, and its Y will be 16.76, width 5, height 1. And its action will be next record. And I think I got its position X wrong because it appears to have disappeared on me. So position X, oh wow, it should be 7.06. And there we go. Let's test it to see if it works. Flipping out of design mode, and if we just go to next course and now do next, previous, it works. It helps to save your form as you're going along, because a crash could be catastrophic otherwise. So all you have to do is click on the X to close the form without saving, and it will prompt you to save. Click save and you're good to go. I'm now going to just click edit and pull it up again. So now it's time to get some stats. So first of all, I want to know how many courses each student is enrolled in. I'm going to call this data source DS student course count. So now I set the data element of this form, and it's going to be a SQL command. We get an SQL window. I'm going to paste in some SQL, and I'll explain the SQL right now. So first of all, what we're doing is we're going to join two tables, table map course student and table student. And the field that both of these tables have in common is the student ID. And so what we're going to do is we're going to get the ID, and I'm going to concatenate the first name with the last name using the double pipe concatenation symbol and the blank space in between first name and last name. I'm giving it a name of first last, and this is going to be a group query, so we use the function count, counts the number of course IDs, and we're going to call that courses. So in order to make that happen, you do put in a group by statement, so we're grouping by the ID and the combination of first name and last name and ordering it by courses. So if I first of all run that query so you see what it looks like, The actual query when it's run looks like that. Henry Smith was in 3 courses, Paul Adams was in 2, Richard O'Connor 2, etc. So if I just click the X on this query command, it will prompt me to save it into the data source. And so I click yes to save changes, and you can see it has been saved into the data source. The data source selected, I click on my table control, and I'm just going to draw it anywhere because I've taken note of what the size and coordinates of this table control are going to be. In this instance, its position X is going to be 17.29 and its Y position is going to be 1.53, and the width is 7.42 centimeters and the height will be 6.17 centimeters. And I'm going to anchor the grid to the page. And the last thing is to give the grid a name, and I'm going to call it GRD Grid Student Course Count. So hovering over the top bar, right click, and I'm going to insert a text box, text student, and its label will be student, and its data field is going to be first last for first name, last name. And now we're going to insert a new text box, and we select the text box, text enrolled courses, caption will be enrolled courses, and its data field will be courses. So the student text box will have a width of 4 and the enrolled courses will have a width of 2.6. So now we're going to create another stat, and this time it's going to be students, how many students are in each course. So for that we're going to need to create another data source. So new form for the data source, click on the form and we're going to rename it to DS course student counts, and its data properties are a SQL command, and we click on the ellipses here. So first of all, we're just going to focus on this piece of SQL here. So what we're going to do here is we're selecting the fields ID and course name from table course, which we have aliased as C, and we're getting the student ID from table map course student, and we're aliasing that as M. Using these aliases make the SQL more readable. So select ID with the caption course ID and course name and student from table course, and we're joining it against table map course student on the ID field. So that's similar to how a VLOOKUP would work in Excel, etc. What we're doing here is to simplify things. We're putting parentheses around all of that. The stuff between the parentheses here just acts as a table. And so what we can do now is we can say select course ID, which is a caption here, course name, and get the count of students. So we're saying count student ID, and we're going to rename that to students. And we're saying group it on the course ID and the course name. So that enables us to get a summary, and we're going to order it by student ID. If I just run that SQL, you'll see what we get. So what we've got now is we've got the course ID for each of those courses, and we've got the count of students within each course. And that's going to feed the data source. So the data within the data source as it stands is going to look like this table, and we're going to draw information from that. So if I click the X to close it, it will prompt me to save it to the data source, and as you can see, it has been saved. So now what I need to do is I need to add in a grid control. So again, with DS course student highlighted, I click on my table control and I draw a control roughly where I want it to be, and I'm going to refine it with some measurements. I'm going to call it grid course student count, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to anchor it to the page again, and in addition to that I'm going to set its position X to 24.96, Y to 1.53, and its width is going to be 8 centimeters and its height is going to be 6.17. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click over the bar and I'm going to put in a text box 4.6, and we'll just go to its data, and because it's linked already to grid course students, we'll be able to get the course name field. And now I'm going to right click over the top bar again and do text box again, click on it to select it, set the data field to students, and its name is text students, and its label will be students, width will be 2.14, and I need to change the caption on text box 1 and change it to course name. Now you can see we've got the student course count. So for each student here we've got the number of courses that are enrolled in, and for every course name we've got the number of students that are enrolled. So the final stats we want to add to the form is a high level view of all the courses, the number of students enrolled in said courses, and who are the names of, or what are the names of each student in each course. So first of all, let's create a new data set called DS courses. So again, it's going to be SQL command. So if I click on the ellipses, click close on the add table query button, click switch design view off and paste in the SQL. Again, it's a group by query. We're selecting the course ID from table course. So what we're using is table map course student and giving it an alias of M, table course, giving it an alias of C. So c.id for course is c.course name, and the count function around m.student ID from the mapping table, and we're going to give that the name students, where m.course ID equals c.id. So you can work that out. So where the mapping table.course ID is equal to the course.course ID. This is standard SQL. You can Google it anywhere. When you're using a count function, so group by ID and group by course name. Click the X to close it. It will save it to the data source. Now I'm going to create another data source for course students, and this data source is going to be under the courses data source. So if I do new form and I give it another name, DS course students, again this is going to be a SQL command. Click on the ellipses, close, and go into SQL mode. So you're beginning to get the picture now. Last name, concatenation, symbol, the two pipes, which is usually on a Windows keyboard or UK Windows keyboard at least, it's the key to the left of the Z or Z key. And so select last name concatenated with a space, and first name, give it the name, and then the next field is ID, the next field is course ID, map course students, student S, where m.student ID equals s.id. So there's two ways you can join tables. One is that where table A field name equals table B field name, or the other way is inner join, and then inner join table A dot field name equals table B dot field name. Okay, so I'm just going to click the X and save that. So the next thing now is I'm going to put a grid on the form. So selecting the courses data source first, I go down and the table control, and I just draw a grid anywhere because I know what my measurements are going to be for this. So this grid is going to be called grid course enrolled student count, and let's anchor it to the page as usual. So its position X is going to be 13, and its position Y is going to be 8.8. Its width is going to be 11.3, and its height is going to be 8.53. I'm going to put in the fields for courses and students. So insert column text box, text course, and I'm going to call it course, and I'm going to give it a width of 7.41 centimeters. And then I'm just going to hover again over the top bar text box, and I'm going to call it text students. The caption I'm going to give it is enrolled in the course, okay, and its width will be 3.15 centimeters. So now if I click on course, because the grid is tied to the data source, it's going to suggest some fields, and the fields it's suggesting are course name. Now I'm also going to put on the other grid onto the form. If I now click on course students, and if I draw a table in this instance, and I'm going to give it the name grid students in course, and again I'm going to anchor it to the page. So starting with position X, I'm going to make it 24.71, and position Y is going to be 8.81, and the width is going to be 8.07, and the height will be 8.53, and that's that set up. So now we're just going to add the students text box, and so I'm going to give it the name text students. I'm just going to call it students, and its width will be 7.25, and its data will be name. So initially we'll just test to see if everything's working okay, and yes, so we've got our various courses and we've got a complete list of students, but what we've now got to do is link this students table or grid to this course grid, so that when we change course here, the 2 students that are in this course and the 3 students that are in this course will be listed on the grid on the right. So the way that we do that is, remember that the courses and enrolled and the student enrolled count is based on the DS courses dataset, and the students within each course is based on the course students dataset. So what we've got to do is link the course students dataset to the courses dataset. So the way we do that is, given that DS course students is under DS courses, because it's under DS courses, we have these additional properties here: link master fields and link save fields. So if I click on either of these ellipses, I can choose the subform, which is course ID, and the master form, which is ID, and we're good to go. And now if I test the form and I choose different courses, you can see now we're getting the students that are enrolled in each course. So LibreOffice Base Advanced has got 2 enrolled, and these are those people. LibreOffice Base 101 has 3 people enrolled, and it's got these 3 people. So now what we need to do is finalize this form. We're going to put on 3 buttons here. We're going to put on a refresh button up on top, and we're going to make the form look a little bit nicer. So in order to do this, we got to highlight the DS courses, because the buttons are going to drive the courses, which will in turn drive the students, because they're subsidiary to the courses. So what I need is, with the courses dataset highlighted, we get the button control, and I'm just going to draw 3 button controls onto the form. So let's now set up the first button control. Clicking on the button control, we get its properties. And so this is going to be the previous button, i.e. move previous, so PB for previous, and I'm just going to call it previous. So its position X is going to be 13.01, its position Y is going to be 18.02, its width will be 5 and its height will be 1, and its action will be previous record. Okay, so now we want the next button, PB next, and its label will be next. Its position X is 19.2 and its position Y is 18.1, width 5 and height 1. Its action will be next record. Refresh course view button. So I'm going to call it PB refresh, and it's going to be refresh course view. Of course, with all of them, they need to be anchored to the page, which is what I forgot to do to the previous ones. It just makes it easier to position them when you're doing stuff manually. Make sure everything is in the same correct position. So 18.1, just to put it into alignment. And so this will also be 18.1, and its position X will be 26.11. And as usual, its width will be 5 and its height will be 1. And its action will be refresh form. So if I click out of design mode, and so now if I click the next record, you can see the record counter in the grid here is moving. And in addition to that, the members of the course are changing as well. And refresh course view is to refresh courses. When we've added a course in any of the other buttons, refresh course view will allow these courses to update. With DS course student data source highlighted, which is under the DS course overview, we're going to add another button now, which is going to reset the course students or refresh course students. That meaning when we change information such as course information or first name and last name, we can click this button and the courses and students information will update in the form. It's already updated in the database, but it effectively refreshes the form. So if I just call up the form properties, so we're going to give it the name PB for push button refresh course students, and it's going to have the name refresh course and students, and I'm going to anchor it to the page, and its position X will be 1.15, its position Y will be 1.03, its width will be 6.54, its height will be 0.83. So let's do the final formatting for the form. So I'm going to click on the DS no data source and choose the label control, and I'm going to draw a label over the students enrolled courses section. I'm going to give the label student course count, and I'm just going to set its font to dark blue for the font effects, and it's going to be bold, and I'm going to make it 14 points, and I'll just click OK. So I'm just going to bring it down close to the grid, and we'll get its left position. And the way I find it the left position to use is I'll get the left position of the grid, so its position X is 17.29, and I'll give this position X of 17.29 as well. Okay, so to make things a bit faster, rather than formatting each label control separately, I'll just copy it, and I'm just going to paste the copy, and I'm going to put this one here, and I'm going to call it course student count. Position Y is 0.67. I'm going to make this 0.7, and I'm going to make this one 0.7, and I think that would probably approximate a much better positioning here. Its X position I'm going to make the same as the grid, which in this instance is 24.96. So I'll make this position X 24.96. Okay, student course count, course student count, and now finally I'm going to put one here which says add student to course. So drag this down here again, get the position X here, which is 1.15 for the grid, so make this also 1.15, which it is, serendipitously. So I'm going to make its position Y 8.3, and that looks good for the labels. Now the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to put on the group boxes with DS no data selected. I'm going to go to the first group box, and I'm going to call this manage courses and students. So if I just click on the group box and just draw a group, and its properties come up again, and I'm going to call it manage courses and students. I'm going to anchor it to page, and I'm going to set its position X to 0.67 and its position Y to 0.39 and its width to 15.67 and its height to 7.45. Obviously you can do this manually as well. The great way about doing it this way is you can get very precise locations when you do it. So now I'm going to create another one for stats, draw it out, and then I'm going to call this one stats and anchor it to the page. and let's start filling out its positions. 17 centimeters for position X. Its position Y will be 0.37 centimeters. Its width will be 16.34 and its height will be 7.5. And again, I'm going to make this bold. I'd like the font on both of them to be a bit bigger. So I'll make the font and I'll make the other font 12 as well. Now we're going to do another group box for add students to course. And the purpose of this group box is just to show that these are sets of items, so to speak. And in this instance, I'm going to have no label just to keep it clean. And again, we need to anchor it to page. And let's set its position X to 0.67 and its position Y to 8.25 and its width to 11.6 and its height to 11.1. And finally, we're going to do the last group box, which will be students in courses. So I'll just drag this out again and give it the caption students in courses and anchor it to page. So its position X will be 12.5, its position Y will be 8, and its width will be 20.84, and its height will be 11.33, and we just need to fix the font, make it bold and set it to 12. So to give the form a background color, I'm going to go to View Toolbars and pull up the Drawing toolbar, which is docked here like so. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get the square, and I am just going to draw a large square here, and I'm pressing the Shift key in order to give it the ability to be moved. And now I'm going to change the color of it by doing right click and choosing area. You can just pick a color if you like, but I'm just going to put in this particular hex value here to have a predefined color such as that. And now I'm going to right click and choose position and size, and I'm going to put in some measurements that I've predefined from playing around earlier. So 33.34 for the width, and the height is going to be 19.67, and from left I'm going to make it 0.33 centimeters, and let's just see what that does for us. And that looks just like the way I want it, and I'm just going to make sure to send the form to back, so send to back, and that's it. So if I now activate the form in design to run mode, we now have a well-designed form. So to test the refresh course and students button, I'm going to create a course called YouTube tutorial, and before I do anything else, I'm just going to click the drop down button there so you can see it doesn't exist. Now click refresh course and students. Now try the drop down button, and there you have YouTube tutorial. So that's your simple form using no code. So when I say simple to create, but quite advanced in its functionality.